States are preparing to receive billions of dollars for educational funding as a result of President Biden's American Rescue Plan. The plan authorizes $122 billion in relief for all kindergarten through 12th grade schools. States decide how the money will be distributed among school districts. The plan outlines several suggested ways to utilize the funding. That includes hiring educators to address learning loss, creating strategies to meet the needs of students hit hardest by COVID-19, and extending learning and enrichment programs. Joining me now for more on this is Gabrielle Wyatt, the former Executive Director of Strategy for Newark, New Jersey Public Schools. She's also the founder of the Highland Project, which aims to create a pipeline for Black women to hold positions of power and create generational wealth. Gabrielle, welcome. Great to have you with us. So does this funding in the American Rescue Plan do enough to ensure kids are making up all that ground that was lost during this past year?
Thank you for having me, Tanya, and thank you for that great question to kick us off. This question of is it enough? I think about it in three ways. One, first and foremost, this is a record-breaking number that we've received in public education funding from the federal government that can't be denied, and it's important as we think about the gains that need to be had as a result of the last 13 months of learning loss for students. We're seeing incredible flexibility in what's being provided by the feds. In essence, if it's a spend related to the pandemic, it likely you likely can use these dollars to fund educational programs or staffing. We're seeing an additional $7 billion that was carved out for connectivity in the recent funding amounts. So as I think about your question, I first think about, is this infusion of cash needed and can it be used for our road to recovery? My first answer is yes. But if I think about it through an equity lens, is this enough from an equity perspective for our learners furthest from opportunity? I say, and I think many educational advocates would say, it's not enough. And why? How did we get here? We know that the U.S. public education system was not one that was built to recognize the brilliance of Black and Brown kids, including those who may have disabilities, including those who may be homeless. And what we do know is that we have traditionally underfunded Title III, IDEA, and Title I. We need those funding levels to increase dramatically, not just move over the current budgets as a result of the stimulus package. So to answer your question, I think we can do more from an equity perspective. And then finally, as I think about your question, is it enough to close gaps that existed before the pandemic and then were exacerbated by the last 13 months? And for me, the jury's still out. This is where I think it's going to be really hard and really challenging for school district leaders and educators to use these dollars strategically, to use them truly as cures to the inequities we see in the education system, not just Band-Aids.
And we know, as you just outlined, that Black and Brown students have suffered more during COVID-19, continue to suffer more. Are you concerned that since this funding is being allowed to be distributed at the state level, are you concerned that it may be unequally distributed among school districts? You know, who's going to decide who gets what?
That's a great question. I think there are definitely valid concerns about the distribution of these dollars through the Title I funding formula. I am not the expert on the funding formula, but what I do know is that as we've seen dollars flow through Title I before, despite the best intent of Title I, which is to help those furthest from opportunity, we see dollars distributed inequitably or not reaching those who need it the most. So that is a top concern that you'll hear from me and other education experts. I do hope that the federal government in particular listens to this feedback and uses the next several months to unpack why we see inequities in how dollars are distributed through the Title I formula. Two, I think it's really important that there's not a federal or a one-size-fits-all solution to how dollars are distributed, because what COVID highlighted for us is that learners have different needs, right? And parents want different things. And so at a 30,000-foot view, I think it's great that there is local discretion in how dollars are getting out the door. But the devil's in the details. If I were sitting across from a state education official today, I would say to him or her, what's key right now is creating a transparent and inclusive process that has multiple stakeholders at the table, including parents and caregivers, as you chart out a path to how dollars will be used. I think it's essential that you are transparent with the feedback that you hear, that you're posting it, and then saying what's next. I think that as you look at the evidence, as you look at student level data on what kids need right now, you need to repeat that back to the public with measurable goals that you're holding yourself accountable to and consistently reporting on.
And of course, it's not just enough to funnel, large sums of cash into these systems, which you just described are already racially segregated, right? It needs to be funneled to human capital, right? There has to be sort of capable and engaged people at the other end of that money who know how to use it properly and know how to use it where it needs to go. So, how can funding and education help close some of these gaps down the line? And what role, do you think Black women should play in that?
These are great questions. I think first and foremost, this infusion of cash is an opportunity to think about underlying cost structures differently. What could be a big risk in what happens is that these dollars are used to fund permanent positions. That can be very tempting. I saw that frequently in my work in New Jersey and in my work across the nation. The challenge with that approach is that in 2 years, school districts will find that they have budget obligations, but they no longer have these dollars. And so unless we peel back the onion and ask ourselves, what's a more stable staffing model? What are ways we might be able to partner with universities, as an example, to bring teachers into our school district, to teacher share, to lead to a path of better sustainability and staffing models? Those are the questions that districts should be asking themselves. They shouldn't be looking at the dollars first as, oh, I can get permanent staffing, because those dollars aren't going to be there in 2 years. And that's one of the big risks. How do we think about sustainability? When I think about the role of Black women, I first think about the role of the Black mother that we've seen over the last 13 months, and frankly, of Black caregivers, brown caregivers as well. We've leaned on caregivers and moms in particular a lot in the last 13 months, and my deepest worry is that we're not listening to them as we end this school year and plan for the next school year, and that we're not creating intentional spaces where their voices are valued and where they can be part of decision making. And so first and foremost, I continue to name that the most important role for Black women, for Black caregivers, is to be at the table with an explicit seat of decision making with school district officials. The second is for Black teachers, leaders, and principals, that they are also thought of as humans in this process. What we know, and you kicked us off with, COVID has disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities. That's not just kids, that's not just grandparents, but that's staff in the building. And so bringing staff to the table and engaging them on their needs, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and their views of what needs to change moving forward is essential.
Gabrielle Wyatt, thank you so much. You've made fantastic points. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.